Some of the nonsense tribalism in the comments today really needs to be exposed. Trine Daly says the simple fact that you spelt Kyiv, Kyiv, by the Russian spelling of Kiev, Kiev, tells me all you need to know about anything you say. I point out, I should point out, I spent 10 years as a professor in a Russian university. Well, actually, not 10 years as a professor. The first few years were spent as a lecturer, and then I took over as a professor, and I was supposed to be transferred to the chair of theology, and I think I took it up, but then COVID took place, and then Putin invaded Ukraine. So simply because I use the Russian spelling of Kyiv, which is the Cyrillic spelling, anglicized, that doesn't tell you anything. I pronounce it Kyiv, which is the Ukrainian pronunciation. And this sort of nonsensical point scoring. This morning, I use the word Putin very loosely. Let me be clear about that. I think Putin is a concept, not a person. Putin is either surrounded by doppelgangers or he's in a Smeg fridge. It doesn't really make any difference. Putin hasn't been seen since November the 7th. Putin's whereabouts and meetings are closely guarded, and we only hear about them days after they take place. That's another story. Putin is a concept, and has been a very convenient concept for some years. If Putin is dead, it doesn't change the concept. If Putin is live, it doesn't change the concept. If Putin is dying, it doesn't change the concept. Personally, I'm inclined to believe the story about Putin dying on, I think, the 26th of October, just after 8 o'clock in the evening, in his residence. And I'm inclined to believe, as I've been told, that he's been kept on ice ever since. In my entertaining imagination, he lives in a Smeg fridge, because I have a Smeg fridge. He's nudging up against the Smedley HP frozen peas. But there were older fridges, of course, which in terms of shape look very much like the Smeg fridge, the Soviet fridges. Fascinating images, very effective fridges. I had one when I lived in Moscow, and the fact is, Putin or the Kremlin sent an intercontinental ballistic missile to Dnipro, taking out warehouses and blocks. I don't know whether they kill people as well, but it is it is an outrageous piece of machismo. It must have been terribly frightening for the people in the immediate vicinity. How were they not to know? To all intents and purposes, it was a nuclear weapon. It wasn't, thank God. But it was an escalation. And again, it was targeted on a civilian site to take out the power grid as winter approaches. This is the behavior of an appalling coward. And how much of the rest of Dnipro is obliterated, I don't know. But this is using a hammer to crack a nut, and it's not the response of a civilized power. And that is really the point. And a lot of this pootling around on the on the comments, there is a plethora of what I can only presume are either Russian trolls or Russian bots. Alan Rose says the Russians have threatened using nukes dozens of times over the last 2 years. I think it's 16 times. And lots of these sort of questions. There's a limit to how many questions anybody can answer. I very much enjoy the comments, but I find this oppressive bot trolling stressful. This morning I spent 4 hours trying to access a book by Nadine Dorries. She's the doyenne of the old Conservative Party. She's the sort of single-handed priestess of the cult of Boris Johnson. I don't know whether I spelt that word correctly. It wasn't Boris Johnson, the word. Cult, I think, was the word. And trying to get hold of that book has been such a frustration. Kindle has been replaced by a new version of Kindle. Amazon was really very unhelpful and actually blocked my account. I don't know when my account was blocked, but their system is to send numbers to your phone. None of those numbers were getting through, and they were saying, "Oh, well, maybe it's your phone." But when you say that there's an alternative way, there is no alternative way. You just end up speaking to somebody who then says you have to go back to the numbers. And you go round and round in circles. And it's this asinine approach to commerce which makes me worry about any approach we might make diplomatically. Because if this is the way we behave when we're trying to buy a book or when we're trying to sell a book, how on earth will diplomats behave when they are trying to save the world? Because we've seen what twits do, people like Liz Truss. We've seen what they do. And it's very similar to the, I can't think of a better word, asinine behaviour of Amazon. By the end of the 4 hours, I managed to get the book in the end by a slightly different route. And I read through it very quickly. And by the end of the 4 hours, I was quite happy to throw Amazon and Kindle in the bin. Oddly, I spoke to the most delightful fellow in Egypt called Ali, and then he passed me on to a lady who was very, very indulgent, and together they sorted out a problem. It took about 10 minutes to sort out a problem which had been created by this giant of commerce. As I say, there is a link. If the giants of commerce can create a problem simply through bureaucratic nonsense, how are we going to resolve the serious problem in Ukraine? What I take heart from, and I take a lot of heart from it, is that this morning Zelenskyy says that he thinks he cannot countenance the number of deaths that will be needed to retake Crimea, and that the future of Crimea must be in the hands of diplomats, diplomacy and negotiation. That is an astonishing, an astonishing move, an astonishing concession, and it's something that we ought to take very seriously. It's the first hint of a movement towards negotiation. And it needs to be embraced because it comes from President Zelenskyy himself. If he is prepared to make these concessions, we need to see a similar move from Putin, or whatever we call Putin. And no matter what behavior somebody who is bad and evil and abhorrent might exhibit, there is always the hope, if he actually still exists, or if we can identify who is masquerading as Putin, there is always the hope that humanity will prevail. that there is somebody who can sit down and have a cup of tea, not laced with Novichok, and come to an agreement and recognize that the invasion of a sovereign state, a neighbor who was relying on Russia to protect it, who had surrendered its nuclear arsenal to Russia on the assumption that it would be protected, that is as much an international agreement as anything else. An international agreement, incidentally, that was overseen in part by Britain, by the US. We would hope that there could be progress. And I look forward to hearing about that progress. Anyway, do keep the comments coming, please. But these repeated questions and these repeated jibes, if you see somebody else who's made the same comment you make another comment. Be interesting. Be interesting. The repetition doesn't do you any favors, and it doesn't do the YouTube system any favors. It just becomes like a sort of herding sheep. I don't herd sheep, by the way. I've herded goats, and goats don't live in a herd. They actually live in a tribe. I don't know why we call it a goat herder, because it's only sheep that live in a herd. But there we are.